Hiya, welcome to Box on the Box Rock and Celluloid, or Botbrack for short. So today I'm going to be talking about albums that were released in the era of grunge by hair bands or other kind of bands as well that actually are really good, and some of them didn't sort of make the bands any more popular, but they weren't complete failures, I suppose. You might find a lot of the best music by some of these bands in this era. So what put me onto this, I was watching another feature on another channel, and they're talking about Warrant's Dog Eat Dog album. Now, Warrant aren't a band I've checked out much. I've heard the Cherry Pie album, and they're kind of on my list to kind of go, right, look, let's give these guys a fair listen, a fair crack of the whip. So I put the Dog Eat Dog album on YouTube. I was pleasantly surprised by the production, the playing, the songwriting still had the sort of catchy hooks of hair metal. Not a term everyone likes, and I'm not sure I like it, but anyway, we'll call it that. But there was a maturity there, and this was the album, that resulted in Warrant. I'm not sure they did another major release, but the sales were dramatically lower than their previous album, Cherry Pie. But when I checked, it was released August '92. It made number 25, and it was a gold record. Now, if I released an album now, a rock album had a gold record, people at my label would be partying for the rest of the year. But back then, Warrant had sold over 2 million copies of Cherry Pie, and the previous album as well, Dirty Rotten Filthy Stink, and that simply wasn't enough. And this was one of the problems. The stakes were so high in the MTV era, the budget's so big, the recording costs of albums so big, that when the album sales tailed off, into these numbers, it didn't create enough revenue to recoup, to make it worth it for the record labels. By contrast, the grunge bands could probably record quicker. They had cheaper videos, and they didn't have big stage shows and stupid costumes and stuff like that. So it's a very challenging era for these bands. So that was like the first one flagged up. And then I thought about a few other albums I haven't got that would follow this pattern. One would be Extreme, 3 Sides to Every Story. They had a massive hit with Porno Graffiti in 1992 in September. Just checking my notes, they drop 3 Sides to Every Story. It's very complex. It still sells 700,000 copies. It's still gold, but Pornography, I think it sold 2 million. And again, it begins to decline for Extreme, but for a lot of Extreme fans, it's their best album. I'm not sure what I feel about Extreme now. I loved them for a period of about 18 months back in their heyday, but I went to see them live, and I kind of went off them. I kind of like the first album more now, which a lot of people probably think is the weakest one of those first three. But anyway, so that's an album that a lot of people think's a great record now. Then you get the example of Motley Crue. Motley Crue are massive. Dr. Feelgood album, 5 million seller. Takes them 5 years to do their next album. John Corabi Jones on vocals. Again, people don't get it. It goes gold. It only makes number 7, but drops off quickly. And Motley Crue are playing to half full arenas. Again, a lot of people think this is a really great record. They think Corabi's a better singer, it's got better production, it's heavy, it's mature, and it's navigating what's happening in rock well. But I think because of the association of hair metal, the connotations, the audience had moved on and wouldn't give these bands a chance anymore. Interestingly enough, I actually read an article, the guy who used to run Rip magazine, Lorne something or other, sorry, I've forgotten his name, but he regales a tale in his book about he sets up a golf outing for him and a few musician friends, and on the golf trip I think it's 2 members of Warrant, or maybe it's a member of Warrant, maybe it's a member of Motley Crue, and then a member is Stone Gossard of Pearl Jam. And this must have been 92, I guess. So Rip magazine's still at its peak. It's featuring grunge bands, so it's still very influential, but obviously it dined out on the whole hair metal thing. But this tale's really funny because in the feature, in the writing, Lorne, forgotten his second name, he talks about how he's kind of having kind of rock and roll conversations with the members of Warrant and maybe Motley Crue, like I said, I can't quite remember. And later on, Stone Gossard said, kind of why'd you have to act like that kind of thing? I mean, in a nice way, but it's just, there's this idea of never the twain shall meet, but there is Stone Gossard meeting with the guy who runs Rip magazine, because the grunge bands have been featured in that, with the people he's replacing, the hair metalers, and they're playing golf. The other one is Poison. Poison, not a band I like at all, but a Native Tongue from 1903. Richie Kotzen joins. He has an affair with the drummer's fiance, and he's done from the band, but he has a big influence over the writing. And I suspect this is a more mature album, probably harder hitting, mature lyrics building on the previous album. It still goes gold. It makes number 16, I think. Just checking my notes. Yep. And it's a gold disc, so again, not a disaster by any stretch of the imagination, but not the 2-3 million sales that Poison used to. I'll have a troll through a few of my albums now, because I don't own those ones. And these have been featured in other things I've done, but 91 August, Van Halen do this, the Foreign Lawful Carnal Knowledge album. And again, much better, I think, than the previous album, Moe U812. A big record, I think it sells 3 million. It's got Pound Cake, Judgment Day, the top AOR, mature AOR of them right now. They make a really good record, and it does well. And at this time, Eddie Van Halen is pushing his Ernie Ball guitar, and members of like Alice in Chains, like Jerry Cantrell, will use that guitar. So again, there's guys in the opposing camp who love these bands. I think there's a story of Eddie Van Halen turning up backstage very drunk at a Nirvana gig, but Kurt Cobain kind of not really wanted to speak to him. Other one, 91, again I featured this before, Prisons in Paradise by Europe. I'll get that close up. Europe, they have a huge album with Final Countdown. They have a 3 million seller, not as much worldwide, with the Out of This World album, which I think is their best album, one of the great albums of this era. Then they kind of become Tax Exiles and hook up with Beau Hill and make this album. It's a bit more Americanised, but although I didn't like it at the time as much as the other album, I came back to it and realised, well, the songwriting's great. I think Joey Tempest never sounded better on this album. Guitar playing superb, probably too many tracks, but some great songs and songwriting on that. Again, that precipitated, because they only sold 1 million copies worldwide. The next year, Europe split up, and we didn't hear from them again until properly 2003, 2004. Another one from 91, this didn't sort of get this band any further down the line. They'd done okay on the debut, but like a lot of bands, this is Serres When the Blackbird Sings from 91. They went in a slightly heavy-eyed direction. Their keyboard player had left. There's no keys on this album, but if they are, they're hidden. Bought in Peter Collins. It's a really rocking album. It's got grinding guitars. Again, more mature lyrics. And, although the first album's maybe better arranged and more immediate, there's some great songs on that. And their image wasn't very glammy by then, but it just wasn't, what the way music was going. Going into 92, again, Michael Schenker did a reboot with Macaulay, Robin Macaulay in 87, did the Perfect Timing album, had hair extensions, did the Save Yourself album. Perfect Timing did okay, they supported Whitesnake. They're really good records, particularly Save Yourself, very good album. And then 92, he does this Macaulay Schenker album. Not sure what label it came out on. There's the disc inside. And yeah, it's a little harder hitting, a little less polished. After this, the next year, Schenker will kind of disappear a bit and go back into UFO. But again, although it's not as good as the other two records, it is a good record, and Michael's playing's great, and Ron McCauley's singing's fine. So, it's worth checking out. Malmsteen has some success in the 80s. The Odyssey album probably goes close to gold with Jolene Turner's more AOR style vocals. 92, he signs a deal with Elektra, and he does this album, Fire and Ice. Back to front as usual. But some really good songs on this as well. Polished production, good vocals by Goran Edman. Again, full on shred guitar on it, fantastic playing by Malmsteen. Doesn't find an audience. Malmsteen, his next album is on the independent. He principally has success in Japan, but good record. One of my favourites, again I featured it on Doc and Lynch Mob feature it did, is Lynch Mob's second album, just called Lynch Mob. So Robert Mason on vocals on this, who'd later sing for Warrant. Gets overlooked by the Wicked Sensation album, but in a lot of ways I think this is good. I think it benefits from less songs. It's only got 10 songs instead of 12. There's no filler on it for me. It's got a really cool cover of Tie Your Mother Down by Queen, which is done in tribute to Freddie Mercury, and it works really well. I think George's solos aren't as sharp as they were on the Wicked Sensation album, but it's got great production by Keith Olsen, and it's a really good listen. I'd love Rock Candy to remaster this. Again, this album does nothing really. The Wicked Sensation album did quite well. So an album just kind of disappearing into the ether of the times, but a record really worth checking out. Not a hair metal album, this. But 92, Black Sabbath get back together, do Dehumanizer. Again, I featured this in the Ronnie Dio piece it did. And the next year, Ronnie Dio does the Strange Highways album. They're both quite similar, very heavy, trying to connect with the heaviness that's out there with bands like Alice in Chains, stuff like that. Still sounds like Dio era Sabbath, but with some slower and doomy grooves. Again, really good record, a strong record. I think they have a good tour, and it does quite well, but nothing like the early 80s. Here's another hair one. They're not a hair band, AOR, but their debut album, I think, went close to gold. They had a minor hit of I'm a Believer and I'll See You in My Dreams, and they did the second album. Again, going for a slightly heavier sound, more guitar oriented. This is Giant, Time to Burn, sorry. Rock Candy, remaster it, please. This is a really good record. Production's amazing. The guitar playing's some of the greatest guitar playing you'll ever hear by Dan Huff. Some of the best singing. It's AOR hard rock, and that's not where things are going, but it's a really good record. And didn't find an audience at the time. I'd heard it at the time, I thought it was really good. I kind of come back to it and appreciate it more now, like a lot of things. Weird, in the middle of all this, here's two weird examples. Dream Theater dropped this, their second album, and invent prog metal properly in a way. Images and Words. They have a minor hit with Pull Me In, the album goes gold. Really weird. Strange that would happen, and this enables Dream Theater to kind of have the amazing career they have, although the sales were never as high as this. I think the heaviness of the riffing on Pull Me Under sat in well with the kind of Black Album level of heaviness of Metallica, which of course we must remember that there was a heavy metal album doing incredibly well in 91, 92, and it's that one. Joe Satriani, obviously Shredders start to die off in this period. Joe Satriani's had 2 gold albums prior to this, and in 92 he makes what many people believe is his best album, and he does pretty well. He still does a good tour, The Extremist, and this is probably his best produced, best sounding record, and maybe his best collection of instrumental songs, although the Surfing with Air album's more popular. So again, some wiggly guitar dropping in 92. We're in a changeover period. You got to remember, by the time these albums are coming out, the sort of grunge thing, the grunge factors, lasted a year at the most. So going into 93, I think this is the next album I'm picking again. The band I'm going to talk about is Winger. I've done another feature on all their albums. This is brutal. What happened to this band. This is one of the brutal cults. It's their Pull album. Probably, if not their best album, certainly their second best album. This is a great record. It doesn't have a bad track on it, and it's really adventurous. It continues the sort of Winger sound, but with more maturity, more heaviness, less sort of whittling guitar solos. Really good lyrics, looking at the sort of social issues of the time. Dies of Death, they're like playing to 90 people. If you look at the picture inside, they're sort of trying to go for a more stripped down image, but the damage had been done by the single 17 off the first album, and Beavis and Butthead and Metallica throwing darts at them. But you have a listen to that album and tell me what's better, the Black Album or Pull. There we go. 93, Heart had a big AOR period, 3 multi-platinum albums, Heart, Bad Animals, and then Brigade. Have a 3-year sort of layoff till the next album and make this, Desire Walks On. I think this comes out towards the end of the year of 93. Again, really good record. This is produced by Richie Zito, and he did the Native Tongue album by Poison I mentioned before. It's a good record. It's kind of got more of the traditional Heart sound, the old school Heart sound coming back. Probably too many tracks, but again, if you go into my Heart video I did, you'll find out some more about that. Weird one. This album didn't out at all. I never had it at the time. Album cover's terrible, I'll show you it. It's Battlefront, it's Nothing But Trouble by Blue Murder, Blue Murder's second album. Yeah, the first Blue Murder album's a classic in my opinion, but it didn't do great at the time. This comes out, kind of just disappears. It is a good album. It's got good songwriting, great guitar playing. It doesn't scale the heights of the other one, but it's pretty rocking. Still got that heavy guitar. But by '93, an album like that, if you've not had success in the '80s, you're not going to get arrested. Here's a band who didn't get arrested at all and did well in Japan, but it's Doug Aldridge's band Bad Moon Rising. I've got a triple disc here, but their second album, Blood, is a good record from the time. It's pretty heavy, it's hard hitting, but still got the influences of the '80s. There's the cover, but it's in this triple disc. Like I say, principally Japan, where they were doing good. Great vocals by Cal Swan, who was in Tyrant. They were in a band called Lion as well. But this is a great record. You got Dangerous Game, Servants of the Sun. There's a track called Change, which if you never heard Doug Aldridge play back then, he's fantastic now, he's brilliant, but this is some of his greatest playing. So that's an album that, a band that didn't sort of do anything really, but were kind of dropping this kind of music at that time. Weirdly enough, George Lynch, my favourite guitarist, makes this album his sort of only kind of partially instrumental album, with guest vocalist Sacred Groove in '93. It's not great, but it's pretty good. It's got some influences of what's going on at the time, but it still sounds like Lynch. And that'll kind of, what he does on that'll kind of jump ahead to this album. I'll actually go jump a year. I'll go back to '94, I'll jump to '95, and you've got the Dokken Dysfunctional album, which comes out. So they get back together, and this has got, you can hear sort of Alice in Chains influence and King's X, but it still sounds like Dokken, but with a kind of mature and 90s sound. It's really good. The vocals are excellent, the songwriting's good. Not as good as those classic Dokken albums, but still good. I think this, it's kind of like the last hurrah. I can't think that that's the last kind of album by a band like this coming out in that time. But the next time a band like this does an album, they're usually terrible. They're kind of reacting to new metal and post-grunge, and they're really, Dokken make an album called Shadow Life, which is really unlistenable. So jumping back to '94, again, not a hair band, but Dream Theater make this album, Awake, their second album. Kind of gets forgotten about a bit. Weird, but I think it's one of their best albums. I like the first three Dream Theater albums. Again, probably sells about 300,000 albums. Nothing like what the previous album sold, but weird, a prog metal album doing pretty decent business, pretty heavy, with some ballads and hooky songs, with phenomenal guitar playing, in an era where, people, like I say, are buying the third Pearl Jam album or waiting for the next Alice in Chains, But the weird thing is, I was just coming up to, when I was talking about Dokken in '95, by '95, '96, the grunge thing's done. Alice in Chains can't really function due to Lane Staley's drug addiction. Soundgarden have had enough. I think Eddie Vedder kind of makes a decision to be deliberately uncommercial, kind of like what Radiohead did. I kind of understand that, it must be draining, having to kind of appease these massive sales, live up to them. '94, I'm in a band who were never grunge, never hair metal. Hair metal, they weren't, but, had MTV videos and a very successful album, '88, very, very successful album, '99, was Queensryche. So after the Empire tour in 1991, they dropped off the radar and retired to an island to make this album off Seattle and made the Promised Land album. I think it's a very good record. You can hear a bit of the influence of the time because it's more stripped down and more reflective. Although Queensryche never had lyrics about, shagging girls and stuff like that. It's a bit short, this. Sometimes it lacks a bit of meat. And sometimes it feels like a collection of songs rather than an album because of the Empire and the albums before that were all very focused, the fella albums. But it's got some great, it is a really good record. I remember it came out around the same time of Awake. I remember that week was a good, if you were into these kind of bands, that was a good week for someone like me because I didn't like the Seattle sort of thing. And then jumping back to '95, like Van Halen at the Balance album, which maybe there's a good argument it's the best Van Hager album. Well, it runs FUCK and 5150 close. There's a couple of really naff sort of tracks, instrumentals, but it's pretty heavy. It's got some great tracks. The production by Bruce Fairbairn's really good. It's got a cool Van Halen instrumental. Again, a double platinum album by what will become a legacy band in that era. But I suppose really someone like Van Halen, even though they were kind of a massive influence on hair metal, they were so big. They had 10 million selling albums. Remember, with 1984 and Van Halen won, they could withstand the impact more. And Aerosmith as well. They did very well in '93 with Get a Grip, and I think the Nine Lives album was double platinum in '97. So some bands kind of weathered this cold, but I think where the previous hair metal bands, where they really suffered, they lost their deals, and some of them made really bad records after this period to try and make sense of it. Then what happened in 2000 was these bands either got back together or eventually got back together and realised, well, we're just going to sound like ourselves. And they became legacy bands, and that's what we listen to now. A band who I love in this era just really couldn't make a good record was the Scorpions. The Scorpions were brilliant and did very well in the 80s. But their 90s albums don't do it for me, but that's just my viewpoint. Some people like them. Okay, cheers. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed that. Remember to share and subscribe to the Botbrack channel. And I'll see you again soon. Thanks.